High Commander ZYX-427 of the Galactic Confederation stood at the gates of West Point Military Academy, his iridescent scales shifting from deep purple to an agitated green. The primitive architecture before him seemed to mock everything his civilization stood for. In an age of quantum computing and faster-than-light travel, these humans still trained their warriors with physical exertion and antiquated weaponry. "Quite different from our neural enhancement chambers, isn't it, Commander?" his aide whispered, mandibles clicking in barely concealed amusement. The commander's upper eyes narrowed while his lower pair scanned the grounds. "Barbaric," he muttered. "To think the council insisted on this diplomatic visit. We could teach their entire species to fight properly in our simulation pods within a standard cycle." A group of cadets jogged past, their boots striking the ground in perfect unison. The commander's biosensors detected elevated heart rates, perspiration, and, most puzzlingly, increased endorphin levels. They were enjoying this primitive physical conditioning. The human guide, Colonel Henderson, approached with a crisp salute. "Commander, welcome to West Point. We're honored to show you how we train Earth's future leaders." ZYX-427 followed the colonel into the academy grounds, his diplomatic programming forcing him to maintain a neutral expression. The first demonstration was already underway, a group of cadets navigating an obstacle course. Without gravity manipulators. Without neural assists. Without anything. Then he saw it. A cadet had fallen, her knee badly scraped. The commander's sensors indicated a minor but painful injury. In any rational training facility, the simulation would end, and medical drones would attend to the trainee. But what happened next defied all his advanced military protocols. Two other cadets immediately dropped back, helping their fallen comrade. Instead of completing their own course, sacrificing their performance metrics, they literally carried her through the remaining obstacles. The entire group finished together, their collective time suffering but their unit intact. The commander's scales shifted to a shade of blue he hadn't displayed since his own youth. "Impossible," he whispered. "Is something wrong, Commander?" Colonel Henderson asked. "They compromised their individual success metrics for unit cohesion?" "No, Commander." The colonel's eyes twinkled. "They succeeded because of unit cohesion." As they moved deeper into the academy grounds, ZYX-427 sensors detected something else, something that would change everything he thought he knew about this primitive species. But first, he needed to understand what he'd just witnessed. Because in all his centuries of military experience, he'd never seen anything quite like it. And he had a feeling this was just the beginning. Commander ZYX-427 sensors continued to ping with anomalous readings as he followed Colonel Henderson into the Academy's Tactical Training Center. The facility was disappointingly analog, no neural interfaces, no quantum probability matrices, not even basic consciousness uploading stations. Instead, he found himself watching humans hunched over paper maps and terrain models. "You're wondering why we still use physical representations," Colonel Henderson said, noting the commander's fluctuating scale patterns. "It wasn't a question. Your species has access to holographic technology," ZYX-427 replied, all four eyes fixed on a group of cadets debating strategy around a santable. "These methods are inefficient." "Perhaps. But what happens when the power goes out?" The commander's scales rippled with dismissal. "Galactic Standard Power cores never fail. They did on Proxima b." ZYX-427 scales froze mid-ripple. The Proxima b incident was classified at the highest levels of the Confederation. 3 standard cycles ago, an entire Confederation battle fleet had gone dark during what should have been a routine patrol. When they finally re-established contact, the fleet's neural networks had been compromised. The official report blamed a quantum cascade failure, but rumors suggested something far more troubling. "How do you know about," the commander stopped himself, "diplomatic protocols engaging just in time?" Colonel Henderson smiled. "We don't just train our cadets to fight with technology, Commander. We train them to fight without it. To think without it. To lead without it." A cadet approached their position, saluting sharply. "Sir, Blue Team is ready for the wilderness survival exercise." The colonel nodded. "Perfect timing. Commander, would you care to observe?" They proceeded to an outdoor training area where 24 cadets were preparing for deployment. Their equipment was laughably basic: no environmental shields, no atmospheric processors, not even simple anti-gravity units. Just backpacks, primitive tools, and what appeared to be preserved food rations. "The mission parameters?" ZYX-427 asked, trying to mask his growing curiosity. "They'll be dropped in the Adirondack wilderness. 5 days, minimal supplies, no technology beyond basic emergency beacons. They must navigate to multiple objectives while avoiding capture by our advanced cadets playing opposition forces." The commander's scales shifted to deep indigo, a sign of genuine confusion. But without neural guidance systems or tactical augments, how can they possibly? His question was interrupted by a sudden commotion. One of the cadets had discovered a nest of stinging insects in their equipment cache. Instead of calling for medical assistance or environmental control drones, the humans rapidly reorganized, protecting their supplies while helping those who'd been stung. Within minutes, they'd relocated their staging area and were back on schedule, adapting their plans to account for the lost time. ZYX-427's biosensors were working overtime, trying to process the implications. These humans weren't just training their bodies or even their minds. They were training something his advanced species had long ago engineered away: instinct. But there was something else, something in the colonel's carefully neutral expression that suggested this was all merely preparation. These humans weren't just preserving primitive training methods out of tradition or resource limitations. They were preparing for something. As if reading his thoughts, Colonel Henderson spoke quietly. "Commander, have you ever wondered why the Confederation's predictive models for Earth have such a high failure rate?" Before ZYX-427 could respond, an alert flashed across his neural interface. Multiple atmospheric disturbances detected. Incoming weather system. Severe electrical activity. The colonel checked a primitive wrist-mounted chronometer. "Looks like these cadets are in for some unexpected challenges." He smiled. "But then again, that's exactly what we're counting on." The commander's scales shifted to a shade that hadn't been seen in his species for generations: the color of primal fear. The storm struck with devastating speed. Commander ZYX-427's atmospheric sensors screamed warnings as lightning split the sky, far more powerful than typical terrestrial electrical discharges. His protective field crackled and fluctuated, struggling to compensate for the unusual electromagnetic interference. Fascinating readings, aren't they? Colonel Henderson remained inexplicably calm, even as rain lashed the academy grounds. "Almost like the patterns we recorded during the Taipei incident." The commander's scales rippled with recognition. The Taipei incident, another classified event his species had carefully monitored. But before he could process this revelation, a deafening crack split the air. One of the ancient oaks that dotted the parade ground had been struck by lightning, its massive trunk now burning despite the downpour. "Sir!" A cadet sprinted toward them through the deluge. The lightning strike damaged the main power distribution hub. "We're losing power to the medical wing, and the backup generators aren't responding." The commander activated his emergency beacon, ready to summon immediate assistance from the Confederation ship in orbit. These humans would clearly need. "Belay that, Commander." Colonel Henderson's voice carried unexpected authority. "This is now a training exercise. Let's see how our cadets handle it." ZYX-427 scales flickered between disbelief and outrage. "There are injured humans in your medical facility. Without power, their life support systems. We'll continue functioning, the colonel interrupted, because we never rely solely on powered systems. Watch. Already, cadets were mobilizing across the campus. The commander's sensors tracked multiple groups moving with surprising efficiency through the storm. No neural coordination networks, no quantum entanglement communicators, just simple hand signals and what appeared to be pre-planned protocols. A team of cadets reached the burning tree, attacking the fire with primitive chemical suppressants while others secured the area. Another group had reached the power distribution hub, quickly establishing a manual bypass system using nothing more complex than copper wire and basic tools. Impossible, ZYX-427 muttered as his sensors tracked the activities. Their response time rivals our automated emergency systems. Better, actually, the colonel replied. Because they're adapting in real time. Your automated systems follow pre-programmed responses. Our cadets create solutions on the fly. The commander watched as human medical students evacuated critical patients, moving them with practiced precision despite the lack of power-assisted equipment. Their vital signs remained stable, managed through manual monitoring and intervention rather than automated systems. Then his sensors detected something that defied all logic. The storm's electromagnetic signature had changed. The lightning strikes weren't random. They were following a pattern that his advanced analysis systems were struggling to decode. Colonel, ZYX-427's voice carried an unfamiliar tremor. This weather event, it's not natural, is it? Henderson's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held a knowing look. What makes you say that, Commander? Before he could respond, a cadet approached with a sealed envelope. The colonel read its contents, his face growing serious. Commander, I believe it's time we showed you what we're really preparing for. Because that storm up there? He pointed to the roiling clouds above. It's not the only thing that's been engineered. The commander's scales shifted to pure white, a color reserved for moments of paradigm-shattering revelation. The humans hadn't just been training for power failures or natural disasters. Every primitive practice, every seemingly outdated procedure, every inefficient training method. They were preparation for something far worse. As if to confirm his realization, a new sound cut through the storm. Not thunder, but something deeper. Something his species hadn't heard in 10,000 years. Something that should have been impossible. The colonel's next words confirmed his worst fears. They're early. Deep beneath West Point's grounds, Commander ZYX-427 found himself in a facility that shouldn't exist. Gone were the deliberately primitive training areas. Instead, he stood in a command center that seamlessly blended human and alien technologies, some of which even he didn't recognize. Welcome to the real West Point, Colonel Henderson said as holograms flickered to life around them, displaying star charts and movement patterns that made the commander's scales ripple with dread. Though I suspect you're more familiar with its true purpose than you've let on. The commander's diplomatic protocols struggled against revelation protocols, creating a cascade of conflicting impulses that turned his scales a chaotic mix of colors. The dormant ones, he finally managed. You know about them. We've known since they first stirred in the Carina Nebula. The colonel's voice carried none of its earlier lightness. Just as we know your species fled to our sector of space not as conquerors, but as refugees. ZYX-427 scales settled into a deep, troubled purple. The truth he'd been trained never to reveal, that his advanced civilization had once fled in terror from an enemy they couldn't defeat. An enemy that had evolved beyond physical form, beyond technology itself. An enemy that turned a species' own advancement against them. The more advanced the civilization, the commander recited words from his species' most classified archives, the more completely they can be corrupted. Precisely. Colonel Henderson gestured at the screens around them. That's why we maintain our primitive training methods. The dormant ones can't corrupt what isn't there. They can't hack neural networks we don't use. Can't turn quantum systems against us if we still know how to fight without them. A cadet burst into the command center, clutching what looked like an ancient paper printout. Sir. We're detecting quantum disturbances in the Kuiper belt. The pattern matches the Proxima b incident. The commander's scales went stark white. Impossible. They shouldn't be active for another century at least. Our models. Your models, Colonel Henderson interrupted, are based on advanced quantum computing. The same quantum computing the dormant ones have been manipulating since before your species first detected them. Realization struck the commander like a physical blow. The weather pattern above. You were testing our response. No, Commander. We were testing their response. Every time we run these primitive drills, we gather data on how they react to unpredictable, non-networked human behavior. And every time, we learn more about their limitations. Another cadet entered, this one carrying what appeared to be a simple mechanical chronograph. Countdown confirmed, sir. 58 minutes until they breached the heliopause. The colonel turned to ZYX-427, his expression grave. Now you have a choice, Commander. Your ship in orbit has the most advanced defensive systems in the Confederation. Systems that the dormant ones can turn against us the moment they arrive. You can either retreat to safety and watch Earth fall. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Or you can help us fight them in a way they've never encountered. With humanity's adaptability and your species' knowledge of their tactics, we might have a chance. But you'll have to trust in methods your kind abandoned millennia ago. The commander's scales shifted through colors so rapidly they became a blur. Trust in human primitiveness? Abandon the very technologies that defined his civilization? The diplomatic protocols in his neural network screamed against it. Then he remembered the cadets in the storm, adapting without technology. The medical students saving lives with nothing but their hands and knowledge. The raw, unnerving efficiency of human unpredictability. His scales settled into a color he'd never displayed before, one that combined the deep blue of certainty with the bright red of battle readiness. Colonel, he said, his voice carrying the weight of a civilization's worth of fear finally confronted, teach me how to be primitive. Commander ZYX-427 stood in the rain, scales exposed to the elements for the first time in his long life. His protective field generators lay deactivated at his feet, along with every other piece of advanced technology he'd carried. The sensation was disturbing. Good, Colonel Henderson said, watching as the alien commander struggled with primitive rope knots. Now you're starting to understand. Around them, the academy had transformed into a hybrid training ground. Cadets worked alongside Confederation officers who had made the same choice as their commander, learning to blend advanced knowledge with basic survival skills. The sight would have been unthinkable mere hours ago. These knots, ZYX-427 said, his upper eyes focused on the rope while his lower pair tracked the storm above, they're not just about securing equipment, are they? They're about understanding physical limitations, a cadet named Chen answered, demonstrating the correct technique. Every constraint becomes an opportunity for innovation. The commander's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue-green. His species had long ago dismissed physical limitations as problems to be solved with technology. But watching humans work within their constraints rather than trying to eliminate them, it was revealing patterns his advanced neural networks had never considered. A sudden alert echoed through the compound, simple mechanical bells, no digital signals for the dormant ones to detect. The commander watched in fascination as humans and aliens alike responded to the primitive alarm with practiced efficiency. Quantum disturbance detected at Jupiter's orbit, reported a Confederation science officer, reading from a paper printout rather than her neural feed. Unusual pattern emerging. Colonel Henderson turned to ZYX-427. Your people know their tactics better than anyone. What are we looking at? The commander studied the hand-drawn graphs and charts, finding it strangely liberating to analyze data without algorithmic assistance. This is different from their historical attacks. The pattern is less elegant, more chaotic. Because they're adapting to us, Chen suggested, pointing to a particular irregularity in the data. Our primitive methods are forcing them to try new approaches. Which means they can be surprised, the colonel added. Commander, what would your people have done when facing a quantum breach of this magnitude? Standard protocol would be to establish a resonating quantum barrier using our most advanced. He stopped, scales flickering as understanding dawned. Which is exactly what they expect. What they can corrupt. So we do the opposite, Chen said, spreading out a paper map of the solar system. Look at these gravitational points. If we position ships here, here, and here, but run them on mechanical backup systems only. The commander's scales shifted to bright gold, the color of revelation. We create a physical barrier network. No quantum fields to corrupt, no neural networks to hack. Just ships in space, running on gears and human hands, Colonel Henderson finished. Like sailing vessels of old, but among the stars. A new alarm sounded, 2 long rings. 30 minutes until breach. Sir. A cadet rushed in with a sealed envelope. Message from the Chinese Space Force. Their retrofitted vessels are in position. Russian and Indian fleets report the same. The commander stared at his human counterparts with new understanding. While his people had spent centuries advancing their technology, humanity had been quietly preparing for this moment. Every outdated military tradition, every primitive training exercise, every insisted upon redundancy, it had all been building to this. There's something else you should see, Colonel Henderson said, leading them to a different section of the underground facility. While your people were developing quantum barriers, we were working on our own solution. Something even more primitive than mechanical backups. The doors opened to reveal rows of what looked like ancient vacuum tubes, copper wire, and crystal arrays. Technology so basic it predated even the earliest quantum systems. At their center stood a device that hummed with simple electrical current. What is it? ZYX-427 asked, his scales shifting to curious purple. Chen smiled. We call it a Faraday cage. And if we're right, it's going to show the dormant ones something they haven't seen in a very, very long time. The commander's scales settled into that new color, the blue of certainty mixed with the red of battle readiness. Show me. They arrived like a digital aurora, quantum distortions painting impossible colors across spacetime itself. Commander ZYX-427 watched through a simple optical telescope, no quantum sensors, no neural interfaces, just ground glass and human precision engineering. The sight was both more and less terrifying than his species' records had suggested. Beautiful, isn't it? Chen asked, adjusting the telescope's manual tracking. Hard to believe something so lovely could be so lethal. The commander's scales had settled into a steady gray, the color of focused determination. In the hours since he'd abandoned his advanced technology, he'd discovered something his species had forgotten, the clarity of an unaugmented mind. Status report, Colonel Henderson called out, his voice carrying across the command center now lit by simple electric bulbs. Chinese fleet reporting ready, running on mechanical backups only, a cadet responded, working a manual radio set. Russian and Indian vessels confirm position. European Space Agency ships are, sir, they're going dark. Complete systems failure. The commander's scales flickered with alarm. They didn't power down their quantum systems in time. Through the telescope, they watched as the ESA fleet's advanced ships began moving of their own accord, their quantum AI cores corrupted by the dormant one's influence. The ships turned, weapons charging, to face the Earth. They're going to use our own vessels against us, Henderson said grimly. Just like at Proxima B. But ZYX-427 noticed something odd. His newly sharpened organic senses, no longer dulled by neural assists, caught a pattern. No, look at their formation. It's too perfect. Too predictable, Chen finished, understanding dawning. They can only work with what they corrupt. And advanced systems follow predictable patterns, the commander concluded, scales shifting to bright gold. Colonel, the Faraday network? Henderson nodded to a group of cadets who had been standing by ancient-looking control panels. They began throwing switches, sending basic electrical currents through the massive copper arrays they'd positioned around the planet. The effect was instant and unprecedented. The quantum aurora rippled, its perfect patterns disrupting as it encountered something it couldn't corrupt, pure electrical current flowing through simple metal, guided by human hands. But victory was far from assured. The corrupted ESA ships were still approaching, their weapons very real and very lethal. And behind them, the dormant ones were adapting, their quantum patterns shifting into new configurations. They're probing for weaknesses, the commander reported, his experience reading their tactics finally proving useful. Looking for any advanced technology they can, wait. His scales suddenly shifted to stark white. The lunar base. Tell me you evacuated the lunar base. Colonel Henderson's grim expression confirmed his fears. The lunar base, humanity's pride, housed the most advanced quantum computer network in the solar system. If the dormant ones reached it, we need to warn them to shut down, Chen said, reaching for the radio. No time, Henderson replied. They're already in range. Unless. The commander felt every eye in the room turn to him. His ship, still in orbit, carried the most powerful quantum drives in the Confederation. If he reactivated them, they would draw the dormant one's attention away from the lunar base. But it would mean sacrificing the vessel that had been his home for over a century. And himself along with it. Through the telescope, he watched the corrupted ships advance. His species had run from this enemy for 10,000 years, advancing their technology in a desperate arms race they could never win. But these humans, they had found another way. Not by advancing, but by remembering. By keeping alive skills and knowledge his people had dismissed as primitive. His scales shifted to a color that had no name in his species' language, a blend of every shade he'd displayed since arriving at West Point. Colonel, he said, removing the last piece of advanced technology he wore, his universal translator, and speaking in carefully practiced English. I need one of your cadets to teach me how to fly this ship, by hand. Commander ZYX 427's ship tumbled through space, its quantum drive screaming with power, deliberate bait for the dormant ones. At the manual controls, Cadet Chen's hands flew across jury-rigged mechanical interfaces that hadn't existed 6 hours ago. You understand, the commander said in his carefully practiced English, scales glowing with a soft blue light, once they corrupt the quantum core, the containment fields will create a feedback loop powerful enough to disrupt their entire attack pattern, Chen finished, eyes fixed on the crude navigational instruments. That's the plan, sir. Through the simple glass viewport, they watched the corrupted ESA ships turn to follow them, drawn by the quantum signature like moths to a flame. Behind them, the dormant one's aurora shifted, their perfect patterns fracturing as they divided their attention between the lunar base and this new threat. In the makeshift command center below, Colonel Henderson watched through the optical telescope as the commander's ship drew the enemy away. Status of the Faraday network? All stations reporting nominal, a cadet answered, monitoring a simple electrical readout. Current flow steady. Chinese and Russian fleets maintaining mechanical backup positions. The colonel allowed himself a small smile. Humanity had spent centuries being dismissed as primitive, watching as other species advanced their technology to seemingly impossible levels. But they had remembered the old ways, kept alive the knowledge that others had discarded as obsolete. And now, those supposedly primitive methods had become their greatest strength. Above the earth, Commander ZYX-427 felt his ship's quantum core beginning to destabilize. The dormant ones were infiltrating its systems, just as planned. His scales shifted to deep purple, not from fear, but from a profound realization. "Cadet Chen," he said, "I believe I understand now. Why your species never fully embraced automation. Why you insisted on maintaining these redundancies." Chen's hands remained steady on the controls as she executed another manual course correction. "What's that, sir?" It was never about the technology. It was about maintaining the wisdom to know when not to use it. The ship's quantum core reached critical levels. Through the viewport, they could see the dormant one's aurora surrounding them completely, drawn in by the imminent detonation. The corrupted ESA ships hung nearby, their weapons powered down as the quantum intelligences controlling them focused on this new prey. 30 seconds to core breach, Chen reported calmly. "You should take the escape pod, sir. It's been stripped of all advanced systems. They won't be able to track it." The commander's scales rippled with something like pride. "No, cadet. I need to see this through. To witness what happens when we choose to take a step backward in order to move forward." The quantum core's containment field began to collapse. But instead of fighting it, they let it happen. The dormant ones, so used to corrupting advanced systems, found themselves trapped by their own success. As the core breached, it created exactly the kind of quantum cascade they usually used to corrupt technology. But this time, the cascade was too massive, too primitive in its raw power, to be controlled. The blast rippled through space-time itself, disrupting the perfect patterns of the dormant one's consciousness. The corrupted ships, suddenly freed from quantum influence, drifted powerless but intact. And in low Earth orbit, protected by nothing more sophisticated than copper wire and human ingenuity, the Faraday network hummed with simple electrical current, maintaining a barrier that would remind any future quantum entities that humanity was not to be underestimated. 3 days later, Commander ZYX-427 stood again at the gates of West Point. His scales, still exposed to the elements, shifted through colors that reflected the profound changes in his understanding. "The Confederation's training academies will be implementing new curriculum," he announced to Colonel Henderson. "Or perhaps I should say, old curriculum. The ancient ways have value," the colonel agreed. "Not because they're ancient, but because they work." "Indeed." The commander watched as a group of cadets jogged past, followed now by several young Confederation officers learning the value of physical conditioning. "My species spent millennia advancing our technology, thinking we were progressing. But your people, you understood something we had forgotten." "What's that, Commander?" "That true advancement isn't about replacing the old with the new. It's about understanding when to use each." His scales settled into that new color, the one that combined certainty with readiness. "The dormant ones will return, eventually. With new tactics, new ways of corrupting advanced technology. And we'll be ready," Chen said, joining them at the gates. "With old methods and new. With human ingenuity and alien wisdom. Together." The commander's scales rippled with approval as he watched more cadets and aliens training together on the obstacle course. They were learning from each other, growing stronger not by advancing beyond their limitations, but by understanding and working within them. And in that understanding lay humanity's greatest lesson to the galaxy: sometimes, the most powerful way to move forward is to remember how to step back.